So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Stephanie Banos, Executive Vice President of Ipsos's Customer Experience Team. Stephanie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Our topic of conversation is very topical with many of our clients right now, which is why we thought this was an excellent time to do a webinar on this. Many of you are experiencing uncertainty in your businesses, uncertainty in your investments that you've made in past CX programs or budget requests that you had last year to enhance the customer experience. So at this time, we wanted to really emphasize key strategies that you can follow in order to ensure that you're still giving the customer a seat at the table in your organization. So we'll cover today first 5 core objectives for CX owners. The first being driving throughput on outcomes. Second, maintaining the insights engine. Third, how to articulate value. 4, maximizing impact. And 5th, securing buy-in for future investments. And then following those examples of what some of our clients are facing and the strategies that we recommend you put in place in a similar scenario, I'll hand it over to Mary to speak to how to secure and measure return on investment. All right, so to start with the first one, this is a scenario where you run into a situation where a very, very long-standing effort, multi-phase, multi-year, a lot of investment dollars already put into play is at risk of being put on pause or slowed down before completion. And as a CX owner, you know that slowing down that investment is ultimately going to yield a lower ROI than had been originally articulated in the business case. So one of our financial services clients was experiencing this scenario on a 3-year customer experience enhancement journey. And on the following page, I'll share with you some of the example strategies that we recommend in this scenario. So the overarching theme here is to continue to demonstrate that the need for the investment is still very real. One avenue to do this is through the course of that multi-phase CX investment, showing early wins and identifying leading indicators of success so that you can promote those KPIs and keep attention on the impact that's being had in the near term while waiting for the longer term result. Not many programs are kicked off thinking about those near term impacts, but it is very much a best practice to do so. So in the future too, if you're ever looking at making a multi-year investment in an enhancement to the customer experience, say maybe you're moving towards more self-service, or you're looking to upgrade technology across physical locations in order to deliver a hybrid digital experience, you definitely need to step back in the beginning and come up with a measurement strategy that not only secures insight on the longer term investment, but also the shorter term quick wins along the way. Another tactic in this type of scenario is to go back to the original business case that was created for that more mega CX investment and dust it off and evaluate it. So there is potential that some of the assumptions that went into the original business case are no longer true. And by going through the exercise of revalidating it, it demonstrates to your leadership that you are being financially aware and frugal when it comes to the CX investment, and you are taking steps to reconfirm the business case, but then also in doing so, 9 times out of 10, it's going to prove that the investment is still very much necessary. You can also see on the right side here, we did a study called Ipsos CX Global Voices last year. And in this study, 2/3 of CX professionals strongly agreed that CX is a way for companies to outperform their competition. So metrics like this also fuel those business cases when you need to re-support the original story. So going to the next one. This is a scenario where, say you have a very long-standing insights program that's used by many different parts of the business. Different business units, different product owners are coming to you for CX insights that power the decisions that they make for their area of the business. Sometimes also these programs lead to financial compensation for members in different parts of the business. When programs like this are put in pressure, the CX leader needs to really rally their stakeholders to be a voice alongside with them on the value of the program. So some of the ways to do this are to really just gather stakeholder feedback. So similarly to how you're collecting feedback from customers to inform business decisions, collect feedback from the stakeholders who leverage your insights and use that power of their voice to underscore the need to continue to invest or invest further in those programs. Crowdsourcing the value makes it more than just your argument. It makes it the overall business's argument for why that program is so imperative to the organization. Another ancillary benefit of doing this, and not just doing this in moments of pressure, but doing this all of the time, is it can identify different areas to evolve the program or optimize the program. And in collecting that feedback, you might find that there actually are some efficiency opportunities. Perhaps something should be run less frequently, maybe other things more frequently, and without having asked your stakeholders for their feedback, they might have just continued in status quo because it's status quo for the sake of it. So these gathering stakeholder feedback in a formal way through a feedback mechanism a couple times a year or post waves of a CX program is one of the best ways to gather insights as well as to optimize the program. The next example is around leveling up how you go about articulating value. This is a common problem that we encounter when we first start to work with an organization, and Mary will speak later to strategies around measuring ROI, but a lot of CX programs, especially when they're run in-house, they're run without a mechanism to tie insights back to real revenue impact. And when insights aren't tied back to real revenue impact, they can be viewed as nice to have. Now, philosophically, we all know that there is a real revenue impact in understanding the customer experience and optimizing the customer experience, but putting something in place that makes that tangible is incredibly important. And when that's not in place in a budget pressure scenario, then it makes it all that much harder to defend your position. So if you are in a situation where, like 1 in 6 companies, or I'm sorry, I should say 1 in 5 and 6 companies where you don't have a measurement strategy in place to link CX to financial performance, then there's a couple of things that you can do in order to close that gap. So the first is to pick a couple key investment areas in the customer experience and just do a retroactive pre and post impact analysis. Sometimes you'll have really robust data that allows for this. Sometimes it'll be a little bit weaker, but even if you have some directional understanding of what the lift was from CX investments, then it can go a long way to support that story for continued investment. If that is not a viable solution, the next place to go is to look at some of your very highly engaged customers and just go out to them directly and understand if they did feel a notable improvement in their customer experience in the last 6 months, in the last year. By getting direct feedback from highly engaged customers who you know have experienced the before and after, there's a way to identify if there's a signal in that data that's showing that, yes, the impact is real. And then that can be used to model the financial impact as well. The last place here is to, start to look forward. So define the KPIs that you're going to use to measure programs' performance overall, and establish some milestones to read out on those KPIs. So for example, if your CX Insights program is leading to investments that are meant to increase repeat rate of purchase, or if the investments are meant to reduce service calls, really emphasize exactly what those KPIs are and how you're going to go about tracking them and how you're going to go about attributing changes in those KPIs to the programs that you've put in place and the insights that were used in order to get to the decisions to put those programs in place. So this is a bit backwards looking and forward looking at the same time, that when you are in a situation where you can't speak to the revenue impact of a CX program, there are still ways that you can back into it, but make sure that you don't run into that scenario again in the future. Right. So the next scenario holds true both in budget pressure scenarios as well as throughout every year as a CX professional. So there's always a need to maximize the impact of your investments. So this particular client had a need to make really smart investments in initiatives that were going to have a very broad impact and reach mostly the high value customers, because with only so many dollars to go around, those dollars had to be spent in the best way. And this is something we all run into, right? There's a litany of opportunities to improve the customer experience, but we can't possibly go after all of them. So which ones are going to have the biggest bang for the buck? So the way that we go about this is we start by identifying the high value customers, both in the current sense as well as through lifetime value modeling. Once you've identified the high value customers, then you have a segment of customers where you can go and look into the key drivers of satisfaction, loyalty, and retention for that higher segment. Identifying the key drivers is then the signal of where you should invest, where perhaps the key driver is an area of strength for your business and therefore leading to high rates of retention and high value with customers. Therefore, you need to make sure that you're exploiting that and protecting that area of the experience, versus some of the key drivers of dissatisfaction, where you need to really invest your dollars in order to ensure you don't lose those high value customers, as well as you drive more customers into the high value segment. From there, there's not only an opportunity to invest in those areas as it relates to impacting high value customers, but we can also estimate the impact of those investments on the halo of all other customers in your base beyond high value. And that gets to a really interesting analysis around not just the core impact of a CX investment, but the ancillary impact around it and exactly what revenue you can expect out of relative investments in the customer experience. And that allows for more accurate prioritization and then higher rates of return on the CX spend. And this last one, which we see quite frequently, is where you have a leadership team that is really bought into the concepts of customer centricity. It might be part of your vision statement. It might be part of your mission as a business. Everybody maybe even has something in their job description that talks about how customer experience is the core of everything you do. But as the customer experience owner, you continue to see budget go to core functions as opposed to the CX function. So you're seeing budgets go to sales, marketing, and operations as opposed to CX. Of course, you know, right, that CX is spanning across sales and marketing and operations. Therefore, the way to be successful when this is the case is to work with those counterparts and secure their buy-in and their commitment to long-term connectivity and how you make decisions on CX. So on the next page, I'll talk about how to go about this, and this is different in every organization. Right now, in our recent survey last year, we saw that only 1/3 of organizations do have a formal governance structure in place to allocate CX resources and activities. That is often the responsibility of the CX person to put in place. So a lot of times we wait for that to come from the top, but when it does happen, and it happens quickly, it's when the CX owner takes the reins and really pushes for that governance model and for that committee to come together. So here we recommend taking a connector approach. So building relationships, building bridges across different business units that play a role in delivering customer experience, and getting crisp with them about what exactly they're investing in to drive a better CX and what information they need, what insights they need to make better decisions. Once you have an understanding of what they're doing and how they're doing it, then you have an ability to start to associate investments in different parts of the business back to that central CX mission. And then you can have conversations around the budgets that are being spent in operations, sales, and marketing that are ultimately dollars investing in CX. So once those teams are pulled together and there's a kind of unveiling of how much investment is existing in customer experience, then it gets even easier to engage more cross-functional leaders in a unified story about where spend is and the impact of that spend. It also often reveals a lot of inefficiency. So where maybe two different business units are tackling the same problem, but they're tackling it from different angles, and there'd be more power in them coming together and tackling that together. So this leads to a very natural coming together in a governance structure. And then more cross-functional collaboration in prioritizing investments in the customer experience, how each dollar is spent, as well as an amplification of ROI, because each dollar that's going into CX is now getting put to use in more ways across the business, resulting in even more of a reason to invest further in customer experience. So main takeaway here for CX leaders is to almost look at the decentralization of CX in your organization, if that is the case, if you're one of the 2 of 3, as an opportunity for you to take that connector role and start to bring teams together. Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to Mary at this point to talk into a bit more detail around exactly how to go about measuring the return on customer experience investments.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Steph. And thanks again to everybody for attending today. Yeah, to support critical decisions on CX priorities, what Ipsos CX does is provide this specialized approach on calculating the return on customer experience for investment, which we call ROCSI. Earlier, we mentioned that in a recent Ipsos CX global study of CX leaders, we found that only 1 in 6 companies have models in place, and Steph talked about this, that are really capable of linking CX success to financial performance. Without this empirical linkage, and we're going to get into data now, using your own customer data, and even with the conceptual link that I think we all know between CX success and financial performance, it can make it really difficult for us as CX leaders to justify current spend or petition for further CX investment. So Ipsos has this approach, again, that we call ROCSI, where we statistically link a positive customer experience to business outcomes such as financials like share of spend, net sales, retention, and these are just to name a few. When we do this, we not only prove the importance of the customer experience, but it allows us to build what-if simulations and action plans for you that can now include specific financial impacts of new CX expenditures, or frankly, reductions in existing CX investments. Once we arm you with this data, and when you're faced with the tight budgets that we're talking about today, or even budget reductions, we can make smarter decisions on where you do and don't spend on CX. And those decisions will now be aligned to maximizing the impact of each dollar and minimizing the risk of churn from underinvesting in what we now know to be key areas. So in these uncertain economic times, a common finance-driven solution is to just unilaterally limit or pull back on investments across your business units, or place extra governance on your investment decisions. When this happens, CX owners can be equipped to defend what we call the break-even of CX tolerance. As Steph talked about, we know that not every customer segment has the same customer experience expectations. We know that. And certainly not every customer segment has the same value to your organization. So rather than imposing what tends to be these unilateral investment limitations, what your ROCSI linkage data will allow you to do is make more deliberate and more precise decisions about what that minimum viable experience might look like for certain segments of your population, and then the financial impact of churn for each of those customer types. So overall, armed with this analysis, your organization can make those smarter decisions during these challenging times. Said another way, the risk of constricted or redirected CX investments can outweigh near-term savings. And this is something we can help you prove. The risk, of course, is alienating the wrong customers and creating a high cost need to acquire new customers in the future, which is what we were trying to avoid with this analysis. So now we've statistically linked a positive customer experience to business outcomes. And we've also identified the value of various customer segments in your organization, as well as how customers' experience expectations vary by those customer groups. And next, what we must do is identify how to actually move our KPI or our measure of a positive customer experience. We do this by identifying the key drivers of CX and prioritizing actions based on those results. And Steph talked about this a bit as well. I mentioned earlier that our Roxy analytics allow us to build those what-if simulations and action plans that can now include specific financial impacts of new CX expenditures or reductions. As part of those simulations, what we do is we feed in the key drivers at both the touch point and the individual attribute level and show how actioning against the factors that matter the most to your customers will impact the customer experience overall. And now we can say how they ultimately impact business results. So prioritizing during economic uncertainty looks different than in stable growth environments. The cost to action against each key driver will vary along with the impact of improving performance on each key driver. We recommend that each key driver of positive CX is considered under scenarios of status quo investment levels, increases in investment, or decreases in investment. Armed with insight on impact by customer segment, we can help you devise informed business cases prioritizing your CX budget allocation. What this approach does is it results in building blocks, whereby clients can restructure their portfolio of CX initiatives through the year as budget guidance evolves, because you have those various levers to push and pull. So once your action priorities have been identified and quantified for both spend and business impact, what we tend to do is work through facilitated workshops with key stakeholders. We work with our clients to turn those prioritized initiatives into actionable arguments for investments. What we do is we work with your teams on site to sort of deconstruct the planned actions and come to decisions efficiently, get clarity on outcomes, and embed what we call storytelling best practices to ensure a complete and cohesive argument is made for those making the ultimate investment decisions. We want to help you take the best story with the most evidence back to your leaders to make these cases. So, given the current economic environment, you might be getting questions like these or be asking yourselves questions like these more often. And you'll see them here on the screen. So how do we justify and prioritize CX investments? How do we forecast the impact of CX investments or pullbacks? What's the commercial value of an increase in my CX KPIs? How should I reallocate budget when tough trade-offs are required? And how can I drive buy-in for my CX budget recommendations? These are all questions that Roxy linkage analysis can ultimately help you to answer. So that's our presentation for today, and now we're going to move to questions. Steph, do you have any questions there?
Yeah, I have one on where does CX tend to sit within the organization? It's a really good question. So unfortunately, it's a more complicated answer than it is a question. Every organization is different. So as I mentioned, taking that connector role is probably the most common requirement when CX is fragmented. Sometimes CX reports into the CMO. Sometimes it actually sits above the CMO. Some organizations have a chief experience officer, chief customer officer, and the CMO actually reports into them, along with maybe the chief retail officer, chief operations officer. A lot of times it's a segment within multiple different business units. So you might have a CX team within marketing, another CX team that is within retail operations, another that's within customer service operations. So it really is different in every organization. More mature organizations have centralized it. We actually, Mary and I had a conversation with one of our clients a couple of weeks ago about, given their business model, their maturity, and their ambition, what is the best place for CX to sit? And in their case, it made sense to be a COE that was a bit of an organization that was on the side supporting multiple different teams and probably having a dual reporting line into the marketing organization and the sales operations organization. So it is definitely different based on your industry, your organization's maturity, and your current level of investment within CX. So unfortunately, it's not there is a best place for CX to be. That said, the best scenario is truly when the CEO of the organization is committed to a great customer experience as well as a great employee experience. When that happens, it becomes much easier for all of the various CX teams to stay connected and rationalize their budgets to make the best investments with the highest ROI.
Great, sounds good. I have another question here. What type of research study do I need to do that might include the linkage analysis that you just talked about? Okay, great question. I'll take that one. Typically, ROXY is conducted within what we call CX relationship studies. So these studies typically utilize your customer databases as a sample source, and they're sampled at the total customer level. So they run the swath of your entire customer base. And we use those studies to, you heard me talk about key driver analysis. We typically use those studies to understand what are the things that are, what are the touch points, what are the moments of truth that are the key drivers of whatever your CX KPI is, whatever your measure of a positive customer experience is. And what that allows us to do is, because we're utilizing your database as a sample source, is link those KPIs, that overall KPI or measure of positive customer experience, back to your actual database. So whatever the case may be, I talked about things like churn, retention, and the like. Whatever the measures are that we have access to, we can statistically link back, and therefore you can understand how the waterfall occurs. Once we have that linkage, we can now tell you, here are the key drivers of a positive customer experience, and here's how that business metric will move once you make those improvements and move the needle on those key drivers.
We do have another question that relates back to the first one. This says, how does a CX officer relate to a chief data officer, chief privacy officer, head of MarTech? We have all three, but not CX. Should they be combined into a CX role? That's an interesting question because each of those other roles does play have a great impact on customer experience. So a chief data officer, especially if the data is largely customer profile data, CRM data, behavioral interaction data, transaction data, and so forth, the chief data officer is really looking at relationships with customers and how to drive revenue and efficiency out of that information. Then yeah, the chief data officer maybe should be falling into whoever is leading CX. Chief Privacy Officer is a little different. A lot of organizations are starting to have a Chief Privacy Officer. They'll call it a privacy czar. So somebody who is responsible for really advocating for not only customer privacy, but also employee privacy. I'd say that one is less likely to be part of the CX organization and more likely to be part of the legal organization in a way of a really healthy check and balance. Because at least, speaking from my experience, I led CX at L'Oreal for North America, and there was a chief privacy officer who was part of the legal team, who I met with every 2 weeks, just to confirm the things that we were looking to do from a data collection perspective, from a personalization perspective, even moving data around our own data ecosystem was going to be in line with our privacy commitments. So I think having those two roles separate is actually a better thing because it actually gives you appropriate checks and balances within your organization. And then head of MarTech, that one's interesting too, because most MarTech technologies, other than say something like a live ramp that's going to your DMP, are about engaging directly with customers. So in my experience, I've seen the owners of MarTech having either a direct line into head of CX or a dotted line into head of CX if the MarTech owner sits, say, in the chief digital organization. But all of these together are part of the ecosystem that makes for smart CX investments and responsible CX investments. So even if they don't all combine into a role, from a governance perspective, they should absolutely be talking to each other on a regular basis. And that MarTech role, for example, would be a major intaker of business requirements for the customer experience and executor of those business requirements. Great question.
Really good. Anything else you see, Steph?
Doesn't look like it right now.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone again for attending. We really appreciate your time. If we did miss any questions, as Ellen talked about, we will email you directly with answers. And please look out for the recording of the webinar. Thanks again.
Thank you.